On this edition of Uncommon Sense, Nancy Brown joins us to talk about her newest book, G.K. Chesterton and Our Lady. We'll find out more of the motivation behind this newest book. Stay tuned, we'll find out more coming up on Uncommon Sense. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I am Albert Sines, joined with my fantastic co-host, Gretelyn Darkey. Gretelyn, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Albert and Nancy.
Hey, guys.
Nancy Brown, the familiar voice of Uncommon Sense, returns triumphantly for a new book reveal. Nancy, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Albert, thanks for having me on the show. This is really fun.
Well, that's what we aim for here. We aim for uncommonly good fun on this podcast.
Well, you know what you always say. Chesterton is better with friends.
Amen. And you are a friend, and we are happy to see you.
Yeah.
A true friend. Not just a friend, but a real life, true, good down, salt of the earth, all the positive adjectives that I can't think of, friend.
So this is what happens when you get into Chesterton, right? You make some really good friends.
That's absolutely the truth.
And then it's like sticky. It's like you just can't sort of unleash yourself.
I know. Poor Nancy is like, let me go, and we keep pulling her back in. Anyway,
as my mother-in-law would say, not poor Nancy, rich Nancy.
There you go, rich Nancy. We want to talk to you today, especially about your latest book, which I believe is a compilation of essays. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and I've read some of it. I have to confess, I haven't gotten through the whole thing quite yet. My children keep me from reading more than I would like, but so far so good. And I was especially interested because I also have noticed that throughout Chesterton you find like snippets of Mary, and it's really great to find it all gathered in one place. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. That was my goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So goal. You said the word goal. Why were you motivated to put this book together on Chesterton and Our Lady?
Well, I'm sure we've talked about this before on this podcast, but for a while there was a push for an opening of cause for G.K. Chesterton. And there was a priest assigned to go over all of his, as much work as you could, some letters. He collected stories from people. And then they put together this dossier, and the Bishop of Northampton, who has since retired, but it was Bishop Peter Doyle, he looked at the entire thing, and he had 3 reasons for not going forward with the cause. And one of them in particular was the one that this book is responding to, which is that the bishop could not tease out a pattern of personal spirituality in G.K. Chesterton, which when I read that was just like, what? Chesterton, he's always talking about God. He's always talking about Mary. He's always talking about the saints. It just baffled my mind that could be said of G.K. Chesterton, except then I found out that this bishop wasn't particularly familiar with Chesterton, so he hadn't read a lot of his own work, which is where I think Chesterton's kind of spirituality comes through, is in his own writing. So you have to be somewhat familiar with Chesterton's writing and also have read maybe a biography or two, because it's very clear in there that Chesterton had a deep spiritual life, all of his life, not just after his conversion, but before that too. So that was kind of my like, wait a minute, something must be done about this moment.
Well, thank you for that. It actually makes me think, it's funny. It really is apparent, I think, if you actually read Chesterton, that he had a pattern of holiness. I'm actually thinking of one of the talks at the conference. Marie Bates brought up an article where a non-religious person was actually quite upset by the annoying religiosity so apparent in Chesterton. Maybe someone should send that article to the bishop and say, "Hey, look." No, we appreciate his insight. But I'm really happy that you've kind of laid it out in a more concise and sort of codified way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I knew that Chesterton loved Mary from his youth. There were drawings in his old notebooks where he would draw, Mary holding the baby Jesus and things like that. It was clear to me that his sense of religion had something to do with Mary, and that she held a place in his heart or in his mind that was important. Maybe he didn't understand everything about her from his youth, but he certainly knew of her, and she was an important. There was something there to investigate for him, and that was clear throughout his life. It wasn't. There are some people. I don't know if you guys have ever read Scott Hahn's conversion story, but right before he converted, he wasn't quite ready to convert, and someone asked him, "Well, what's holding you back?" And he said, "Mary, Mary, and Mary." Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people, but it was not for Chesterton.
Well, he was so chivalrous too. It makes sense to me that a woman, a lady, would be so, big in his life, and he wouldn't have a problem with that.
Right. Important. So she's an important part of his life. Yeah. So I started thinking, well, if you could gather up all these little pieces, there's poetry to Mary. There were essays that talked about Mary. There's a whole section in Maisie Ward's biography called Mary and the Convert. And Maisie tried to pull together all of these ways that she thought Mary influenced Chesterton to convert. And that was, nuns were praying for him, and he was fascinated with the rosary, and all of these little, there's little clues along the way that Mary had something to do with his conversion. So she put that together in a little section in the biography, which, unless you dig for that, it's kind of hidden there. So I thought if I pulled a lot of these things together and then also got some opinions from other people, people who've thought and who are dedicated to both Chesterton and Our Lady, it would be interesting to get some other thoughts there in that book. So that's what I kind of, wanted to do with that.
You talk about getting contributors and you get other thoughts, and I want to go back to your point about that there was question as to the spirituality and the religiosity of Chesterton. And if you look at the beginning of the book, right, you don't have one or two contributors. You have a list of contributors. And I appreciate that because it basically signifies to me that there's no lack of evidence. There's no lack of people who believe in Chesterton's spirituality and definitely Chesterton's, devotion to Our Lady. So it seems like this is a pretty good resource if you want to say, did Chesterton have any sort of religion in his life? Yes, read the book.
Yes, and I don't know. For me, Mary is one of those people that kind of symbolizes Catholicism. So it's interesting to me how much devotion he had, even as a young man, or even as a boy. And so that signifies to me that there's something in his family, even though he was raised as a Unitarian, and I don't think Unitarians have any particular devotion to Mary, as far as I know. Certainly he had Anglican friends, but then even amongst the Anglicans, maybe there's devotion to Mary, but not in the same way as her importance would be to a Catholic. So it's just curious, that Chesterton, he wasn't, anti-Mary, and he wasn't Catholic for up until 1922. He wasn't, and yet he still has this devotion. And then my belief is that his devotion grew stronger because he and Francis were praying the rosary together and going to Mass together and all of that. So I definitely think that Mary has a role in his conversion and also in his spirituality.
Let's focus in on Chesterton's devotion to Our Lady. Now, you are pegged as the renowned expert on Frances Chesterton, the wife of G.K. Chesterton. And it would be easy to say, if you asked a sort of general question and said, who is the most important lady in Chesterton's life? That some people might want to say, oh, well, it was Frances because she basically ran his life for him, but it would appear that that's not exactly the correct answer. So my question is, versus, the common potential misconception of saying, oh, well, Frances was the most important lady in his life. But this book focusing on Our Lady, what really was Chesterton's devotion to Our Lady that makes this book even possible?
Well, I think that we have to remember that the first most important woman in Chesterton's life was his own mother. So he had a mother who was very, very caring, loving, devoted to Chesterton, especially to the development of his mind. Now, she was known for not caring about physical appearance, and she never had him brush his teeth or comb his hair, which is why he ended up being a little bit of a slob that Frances had to fix when they got married.
A little
scruffy. Yes, that's true. But she was very concerned about the development of his mind, and they did. His parents did take him to a Unitarian church, and there was one particular Protestant minister, Stopford Brooke, and if he was preaching anywhere in their area, they would go there to that church and hear Stopford Brooke preach because they admired this particular Christian. So the thought of Chesterton being devoted to his mother and feeling that mothers in the family are extremely important, knowing how important his own mother was to him, it seems kind of natural that he would say, well, if you have this other family with Jesus and Mary has got to be important. She's his mother. It might not be a spiritual thing at that point, just a mere physical thing. In a family, a mother is very important. My mother's important, therefore Mary must be important. So if you think about it in those terms, there's something that G.K. Chesterton knows, even if he doesn't understand the spirituality of it. Just there's an importance to this woman here in this family, and mothers. Chesterton is raised, that whole chivalrous thing that Gretlen was just talking about. Mothers must be protected. There's something in Mary that I feel, oh, well, maybe it's not protection, but I would honor her and I would defend her because she's a woman and a mother. So there's two things there, that chivalry. That's one of the reasons why I had Sam Guzman write his essay, because he is the author of The Catholic Gentleman. And that whole idea of chivalry and defense of the family, defense of the woman and the child, that's where, his thought comes in there.
Makes me think of The Ball and the Cross, when, you have these two characters who are essentially dueling over Mary's virginity and her honor and the whole book.
And, that was all written before he became Catholic. Mm-hmm. So what he already knew that there was that debate. And he also, you can tell from the book, it's like, well, why is there this debate? That's, let's talk that out. And he attempts to do that in that book.
Beautifully. And I think Chesterton, too, he's always been, in my mind, not at all susceptible to prejudice. I feel like Chesterton, of all people, was always just judging people based on who they were, just by themselves. He never took a prejudgment. He never listened to hearsay. So it kind of makes sense that Mary would be the same, and that in some ways all of the hearsay and all of the prejudice would almost make him want to defend her more.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's almost like he's immune to it, but he's not immune to it. He's listening. And that's the journalist in him. He's listening to what are people saying about Mary, and what is the truth about Mary. He's never one that's going to take a soundbite and go, oh yeah, that's right. There's plenty of Protestants who think that Catholics worship Mary, and that's a common phrase that you hear over and over. And if you keep saying it over and over again, some people are going to believe it, but not Chesterton. He would be the one who would say, well, is that really true? Is that sentence true? And then try to unpack that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes. So it's almost like a challenge to Chesterton when he hears things like that. And that you kind of feel that way in the ball and the cross. There's this challenge to defend Mary or say why you shouldn't defend Mary.
Mm-hmm. And I love that, not to take it all onto the ball and the cross, but that's such a good example, I think, of what we're trying to say here. He kind of goes to the extreme with, I think it's Ian. Is Ian the one who's defending Mary? And he's like almost extremely Catholic to the point where he never thinks anything else. And then the other one is extremely kind of atheist. But they're able to, through their discussion and through their continually interrupted duel, they kind of come to the real truth, and it's beautiful. But yeah, I think you're right, because Chesterton wasn't like insulated in a Catholic way, and but he also wasn't unduly influenced by hearsay, by prejudice, by whatever you want to call it. He was out for the truth. That's a really good way to say it.
Right. Well, and if you think about Mary in her role, there's so many different titles for Mary, Our Lady of this, Our Lady of that. And there's all these shrines around the world and places where Mary's appeared that Catholics believe, that she really was. And we all know in parishes across the world, probably, where people do kind of go a little bit too far into I only will listen to these messages of Mary or whatever. I've experienced that myself. And I think Chesterton is such a great balancing force. Yes, she's absolutely important. She is a primal place in the Holy Family, but she's pointing. This is that great quote where he's recounting this legend from Ireland, where somebody comes across this peasant woman and who are you? And she shows this child and says, this is himself. He's the one you'll be wanting at the last. So she's always pointing to her son. And that's the part that sometimes can be missing in devotional life. So we have to keep that in mind. And that's where Chesterton is so great, because he's such a balancing force. He's saying, yes, she's important, but we worship her child, her son. Mm-hmm. That's who we're coming to see. That's when you see the statue of Mary, that she's holding her son. And that's the important part.
And for those of us who are mothers, anytime you walk around holding a baby, you kind of disappear, and it's okay. Everybody wants to see the baby, and that's okay. You want everyone to see the baby, so you're okay with it. And the baby is the interesting thing, and you're almost just this apparatus that's holding it. But yeah, it's this beautiful. But but without the baby, without the mother, the baby falls, right? So it's this. And Chesterton has some beautiful quotes about that the baby and the mother are sort of necessary to each other, and that there's no way to separate them. And that's part of why we honor Mary so much.
Right. So yeah, he has that great story where he talks about the local Protestant church, and they're arguing over the statue of Mary and Child, and they decide, well, it's too much the way it is. Should we take away the child, or should we take away Mary? And then they decide that they should keep Mary, but sort of he says, deprive her of the weapon of her child. And it's just he's just mystified by this thought that Mary and Child were too much for this church, but Mary alone was okay. And he's just completely like, oh, well, why would that be okay?
Doesn't make sense.
Right. I know. He's so great a storyteller about these things. Yeah. Yeah. And you're absolutely right about the mother and child. I'll just tell you very briefly, we were on a train in Alaska, and our daughter was 6 months old. Every single person on that train knew that Sarah was on the train, and they all wanted to know how she was doing. They had no idea what Mike and I's name were, but they knew who Sarah was because she was a baby on the train. And so, yeah, it's very true.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I want to dive into the book a little bit more, but let's take a commercial break. And and so glad actually to have Nancy on for this commercial break. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a part of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, and there is a few of us in this team that work to help bring Chesterton and all the goodness to life in the different ways that we offer and make available. But also there is in the background volunteers who give of themselves to try to also help spread the good work of the society. And we'd like to make an invitation to all of you. If you have some talent, some skill, some time, some combination of all of those things, and you've been searching for a way to try to give back and you don't know how, well, maybe you could use all that you have and offer it to give some assistance to us at the society. And the reason I pegged Nancy was because Nancy was a very long time volunteer before she spent some of her years actually working for the society. How long, Nancy, were you a volunteer?
About 15 years.
15 years a volunteer.
Beautiful.
Obviously, there was no lack of work for Nancy to help with, and there is no lack of work now. We've talked, as you heard in a previous podcast, to Michael Lavrisha, who is taking time to help us with the Chesterton Digital Library. So, and that's a huge project,
Nancy's
and we
involved in that too. So if you like the sound of her cheerful voice, you could maybe help with that too.
So, and that's just one facet. There's so many things that we could use help with. And so if you're interested in finding out more about a way that you can volunteer or offering your services and seeing how we might be able to use it, please send an email to info@chesterton.org. That's info@chesterton.org. And put in the subject line, I want to volunteer for Chesterton. And let us know how you want to help. And again, definitely would love to have you on board to be a part of growing and spreading the good work of Chesterton, ultimately to help take the ultimate journey towards heaven. So again, please, we'd love to have you on board. Let us know if you'd like to volunteer. And now we return to our regularly scheduled programming.
One quick detour. I do want to point out too that Nancy's new book is available at chesterton.org/store. You can get it there, and probably a few other places, but you want to get it from us. Anyway, pick it up today. It's a wonderful book.
Yes, and if you're a member, you get a 20% discount in the store.
Yeah. So you could tell this gal's been around for a while.
Yes. And I also want to say, for all of you who are thinking about volunteering but don't know what you want to do, you don't have to know what you want to do to write to us. And we will kind of compare notes and see what your skills are and see where we could put you. So don't worry that you can't think of what job you might be able to do. We can help you with that.
There is work. We'll find it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting directly into the book, there's a lot. It's not really a huge book, but there's a lot inside of this not so big book. And I'll point towards a section that I marked first because you referenced Sam's section, Sam Guzman's section on Queen of the Earth. And it has to go back to something that we were already talking about Chesterton and defending Our Lady and chivalry. I'm going to read this one small paragraph just to sort of highlight, Sam's take on Chesterton and Our Lady. And he said, referring to Chesterton, he wanted to be her soldier, her gallant knight. For as he said to himself, you cannot love a thing without wanting to fight for it. You cannot fight without something to fight for. The reality of Mary then, like the world, was to him a reality worth fighting for. Chesterton's whole love for Our Lady was bound up with his love of chivalry, and he pledged his manhood to duel to the death for her, wielding not weapons, but words. Mm-hmm. I liked that paragraph because, you look at Chesterton just from a physicality standpoint, you see this sort of slightly disheveled 6'4", 300-pound man wandering around aimlessly, but inside of him was this sort of, fire, this like the strength for defending Our Lady, wanting to fight for her. And I think Sam nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. So I don't know if you want to, I don't know. There is a thing called Mary's Army out there, and there's this spirit of, well, if you love the faith and you love the Holy Family, what are you fighting for? And so what Mary's Army kind of to me means that you are defending the family. And we can defend the Holy Family by defending our families and defending our neighbors' families and making that family the most important thing that's out there. I don't know. It reminds me also of Dumbledore's army. I don't know if you think of, well, what are you fighting for? And getting behind Mary, and all of the things that Mary says in Scripture. There aren't that many things, but every once in a while, people will think that Mary's meek. And I always remember where they're at the wedding and she says to these people, do whatever he tells you. And I think, well, she's got some authority there, right? So,
what's great about that scripture is it's not just do whatever he tells you. He pretty much, she tells Jesus also, like,
he
fix
obeys.
this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's not my time, but yeah, I better do it because my mom just told me to.
You got it, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's this quiet, gentle authority of this person who understands more about Jesus's life in his lifetime than anyone else on earth. Between she and Joseph, I can just imagine the conversations that happened between them about this child and who they're raising and how's it going to work and, what's going to happen in the end. And so she's gentle. She's a woman, but she's also got this level of understanding. And that's the whole, she pondered these things in her heart thing. Mm-hmm. She's got a contemplation that's, we can only hope for that we can have that rich of contemplation in our spiritual lives. So I think she's a great example for us, for anyone, man or woman, but particularly for women, because we are the ones who are the mothers and the wives. And so sometimes people will say, well, look to Mary. And I've heard a lot of Christian women say, well, she had a perfect son. So it wasn't that hard for her to be a mother. But imagine her life. I mean, she knew he was the Son of God, and that had to have been a hard life for her, because even if he was a perfect child and never disobeyed her, which we know didn't happen because he got lost in the temple and they had to go back and get him, and the reason I think why that's mentioned in Scripture is because it was one of those moments where it was like, we didn't know where he was and we were confused and all of that. And that's telling that he was, in a way, they did have a normal family and normal things happened in their family. I'm sure he got hurt and they had to, repair his skin knees and things like that. But all of those things tell us that we can look to Mary. She is a good example for us, and we can defend her in our faith life. So yeah, I think Sam was right on, and it's just amazing that there's so obviously so much richness to explore in Chesterton's relationship to Mary. And this book just is a starting point where he just tried to gather a whole bunch of things. And Chesterton's written all his poetry. He has a whole book, Queen of Seven Swords. It's all poetry to Mary, and swords. That's another thing with this chivalry. It comes back. We have this, and he's carrying a sword. Why is he carrying a sword? He also carries a rosary, and some people think the rosary is a weapon. And in a way it is.
And I think people forget too that like Mary is a fighter. I mean, she crushes the head of the serpent. That's them's fighting words. So like she's not sitting meekly by. And I think Chesterton understood that. I've always been amazed at how wonderful Chesterton and Francis understood parenthood and family life without having any children of their own. And I think that's sort of another maybe that's a fruit of the unique connection that they both had with Our Lady.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, I mean, Frances grew up also in a nominally Anglican family, so she didn't really have any kind of devotion to Mary in her early life, but she happened to have been sent to a college that was run by a very devout group of nuns that were Anglican nuns. And they had, I mean, if you look at their life, it's very Catholic. It's the Liturgy of the Hours. It's beautiful Christian songs. It's devotion to Mary. It's reading Scripture. Saints. They believe they were, reading the lives of the saints, and all of that. It was forming Frances at a very important point in her life, and that's who she was then. When she left college, she was the only one in her family that was walking down the street and going to the Anglican church. And she was having lunch with the pastor and his wife, and she was teaching Sunday school. And this was her spiritual life when she got out of that college was so important to her. And it was an active spiritual life. It was something that was forming her thoughts, and she was praying and all of that. And that's why Chesterton, when he met her, he was shocked because he never had met a Christian who actually practiced their faith, actually went to church on Sunday. This is the first experience he had of a woman who was actually practicing her faith.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I don't know and obviously his devotion to Mary didn't come from Francis because he was already devoted to Mary earlier in his life. But having Francis in his life now gives him someone to defend and to love and to have that feeling of chivalry. I'm going to protect this woman, even though Francis was a pretty strong woman herself. But she's we're always stronger together when we're together as a couple. That strength is something that now Chesterton, who was a pretty good person on his own, now he has this other half that he's made into the oneness of that marriage. And that's the fruitfulness of their marriage. Even though they didn't have children, they have this faith life. They have this unity for a while in the Anglican church, even though Chesterton knew that wasn't his ultimate goal. Francis was a little less sure of that. But she eventually came around too. But think of all the spiritual parenting, and they were uncle and aunt to all of these nieces and nephews, whether they were true nieces and nephews or not. They were motherly and they were fatherly, and that's why at one of our Chesterton conferences we had a talk called "The Fatherhood of G.K. Chesterton." Well, how can we say that when they didn't have any children? But it's that spiritual essence. And there were always children in their home, and they had over 25 that I counted when I was trying to find out how many times were they godparents. My husband and I have 2 godchildren. We feel really proud of those 2, but Chesterton and his wife had 25 at least. Wow. Yeah, so that's all of those families who they were important to, and who they would look upon these godchildren then as special children in their lives, and that just shows you how much care they had for the children in their lives.
You have to think that the devotion that they both had to Our Lady as well had to influence that, because, Mary, we think of Mary as a mother, we think of her as the mother of Jesus, but she spent a good portion of her life without her son on earth. So, but she immediately adopted like all the apostles, right? So even though it might not be the first thing that comes to mind, she's actually a great example of spiritual motherhood,
right,
as well, even in her own lifetime, as well as obviously now for the whole church.
Right. And there's I spent a little bit of time with the Missionaries of Charity, and they had a very brief prayer, and it was, "Mary, be a mother to me now." And, there are times where your own mother isn't available, but Mary's always there. "Mary, be a mother to me now." And there's times when you just need that, and she can be that person for us. And so, I think Chesterton, and I think GK and Francis both recognize that. And in particular, Francis was devoted to like the nativity scene. She absolutely loved Christmas time and the thought of Mary and Joseph and the stable, and she had little nativity scenes in every room of her house, and they stayed up all year long. And just contemplating that, you know that she contemplated it because she wrote so much poetry about the scene, you know, the stable, and then the wise men and the shepherds, and all of these, each individual item in that scene, you know, she's contemplating and thinking about, but especially Mary and Joseph, and how did they feel, you know, touching these tiny little toes, and you know, looking at this little face, and just being in awe of this child who they've just helped bring into the world.
I think it was you that pointed out that the English don't really know Chesterton GK, but they know Frances because some of her poetry has been set so beautifully to music, and I've sung some of it, and it's really cool to be able to sing it. Yeah, it's just it's so visceral and so beautiful.
Right. When I first started researching Frances, one of my friends over in England said, you know, there's people here who know her name. And I said, well, how do they know her name? And it was because of her music, because you open the hymnal and it'll say, you know, words by Frances Chesterton. And he claimed that her name was better known than Gilbert's in England because of that, which is just amazing to me, because over here in the US, we don't really sing her songs. They seem like they're very British.
They are. Herbert Howells set one of them. He's kind of quintessentially, with Vaughan Williams, like very, very British. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been having the pleasure of talking with Nancy Brown about her new book, G.K. Chesterton and Our Lady, Readings and Essays on Chesterton's Spiritual Life. And, you know, we've sort of cracked the surface of the book. There's a lot here, and I want to encourage all of you to track this book down. As Gretelyn mentioned earlier, you can go to our website, chesterton.org/store, and search for this book. Again, the title is G.K. Chesterton and Our Lady. I encourage you to pick it up, buy it, get it, read it, and learn a lot about the amazing relationship that this fantastic man, G.K. Chesterton, had with the Blessed Mother. Nancy, I wish we could keep talking because there's more chapters in here, and there was another section I wanted to try to get to, but you know, time gets away when you talk about Chesterton, especially amongst friends.
Yes.
You just kind of start going on and on and on. But really, thank you for your work on the book. It's just, I think it's another great addition to the Chesterton arsenal. So thank you for that. And thanks for taking time to be with us on the show.
Sure thing. And thank you for having me. And I just also want to say that if you need the ebook version of this book, you go to that other dealer that we won't mention, but is pretty big online. Just go there.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you very much. And a big thank you to my excellent co-host, Gretelyn Darkey. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Albert.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. We've had such a joy, again, talking with Nancy. We're so glad that you have joined us for this episode, and we hope that you will tune in again as we continue our journey with Chesterton. And as always, remember, Chesterton is always better with friends. Talk to you next time.